Good evening and welcome to the Job Search Solution, the radio program where we talk about looking for a job, changing jobs, changing careers, hiring. And as always, we begin with a prayer. Dear God, grant us thy peace and thy mercy, thy will be done. And as we do every Wednesday evening, in a few minutes, we're going to welcome Rich Levinsky, talking about consultants in the workplace and what's going on there. Really always has some excellent observations about the consulting world. I always bring up in this session a issue that's come up sometime in the last period of time, week or whatever, regarding interviewing and hiring. And this has to do with addressing hiring authorities in the interviewing process. One of the organizations that I work with insists that in the second or third interview that 3 people interview the candidate. And the underlying in between the lines is that 3 people interview the candidate at the same time. Well, getting these people together at the same time is often very challenging and oftentimes carries the interviewing process out over a long period of time. Never mind the fact that psychologists have proven that one individual making a decision about hiring somebody is just as good a decision as if 3 people make that decision, 4 people make that decision, 5 people make that decision. In fact, there are diminishing returns once you get past 3, but we won't get into that. Well, my client was needing to have these 3 people interview this guy, and they were dragging it on because nobody could get together. So they devised an idea that 3 of them would interview the guy. One of them would interview him in person in their office. One of them would interview him while he was driving, and another one would interview him while in a remote office via a Zoom interview. Get that. One guy's in the office, one guy is driving and doing it over his phone. The other guy is doing it in a remote office. Well, you can see where this is going. It was a disaster. I don't even know where to begin. The guy that was in the office interviewing the candidate was asking the questions, and the other 2 guys were listening. One was listening while he was driving. The other one was listening, who knows where, whether he was listening or not. The guy in the office was actually taking notes, which is nice, but you know absolutely for sure that the individual that was driving was not taking notes. And who knows what the other guy in the other office was doing. Now, this went on for 45 minutes. The interviewing authority that was in the office was also the hiring authority, and he was getting, according to the candidate, a pretty darn good idea about what the candidate was doing and what the candidate had done, because he was taking really good notes. Makes sense. The guy that was driving wasn't able to take notes and was trying to look at the road while he was looking at his phone, trying to interview the candidate. Well, after the interview, he had some real concerns. He said, well, what about when the candidate said this? And what about when the candidate said that? And I wasn't sure of this, and I wasn't sure of that. And I was going through some pretty rough traffic while I was doing this. I mean, he even admitted it. And the third guy really didn't have much to say at all. Needless to say, after the interview was over and all of these guys got together, they couldn't necessarily agree on the candidate. The guy driving had some concerns, and he kept talking about, well, what about this and what about that? And he hardly asked any questions at all. And the ones he asked, according to the candidate, were kind of follow-up questions to a question that had already been asked. In other words, this was a cluster and it was a mess. And it really didn't work out very well at all. Now, the candidate's still in the queue. Ironically enough, the candidate is probably better than anybody that they've seen anyhow. And so he still may have a chance. But needless to say, this is a terrible way to interview, all because a company comes up with this idea that they have to have 3 managers interviewing this candidate at the same time. They'd already dragged the thing on for 2.5 weeks, and this was the only way that they could get 3 people together. Now, this doesn't make common sense. Even common sense, it doesn't make sense. Companies need to think about the market. The kind of candidate these guys were looking for was real hard to find. They were lucky to have found the one they did. In fact, in the past month, they've only come up with 2, and then they have to interview this way. This is not the way to do it. Think about this. It's better off if the one guy in the office was the one doing the interviewing, and let the other 2 guys listen, I guess, if they want, but not be that involved in the interviewing process. Just not a good way to run a war, or not a good way to interview. It didn't speak very well for the candidate, for the company. The candidates got some concerns about if this is the way they interview, how do they run their business? So a wise man learns by mistakes. A wiser person learns by other people's mistakes. All right, we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned. This is Tony Bashara with the Job Search Solution.